Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lisa, and we're just waiting for Alaina to jump on with us too, and then we'll be going ahead and getting started with our DBT skills session today, which is going to be focused on skills, our DBT skills that can be used for addiction. So some of you may be familiar with these skills, and some of you may be a little less familiar with them, but they can certainly be applied to addiction specifically. But I think actually they can be useful for a lot of behavioral issues that may come up. Hey there, Alaina.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
So I guess to get started, Alaina, why don't we introduce ourselves a little bit, just that way people can get to know us. So my name is Lisa Besler. I'm one of the therapists here. I'm the clinical director at DBT of South Jersey, and I've been a therapist for a long, long time, over 10 years, even more than that. And I've been practicing DBT for a long time as well. I was trained in DBT back in 2013, and I really enjoy it. And in addition to that, I love to do trauma work, and I'm just excited to be here with everybody and to participate in this webinar and hopefully bring a little bit of information about some of the lesser known DBT skills to all of you with Alaina, who is fantastic. So I'm excited to have her here as well. Alaina, why don't you tell everybody about yourself?
Yes, I'm Alaina Cara. I'm new to the practice as of last August, but I'm certainly not new to DBT. I've also been a therapist, I'd say about 13 years now. I started learning DBT maybe third year in, so about 10 years, but really formally ramping up my training about 8 years ago during foundational training. I wanted to sign up for this webinar. We had a choice of topics, and I made no hesitation to sign up for DBT skills for addictions. I absolutely love these skills. As Lisa mentioned, they're not taught in a skills group. So if you are here today and you've been in the skills group, this will be new for you. And that's what makes this webinar, I think, so unique, is you're going to learn something that you're not going to learn in a skills group and maybe haven't heard before. They're very adaptable. I love them, and I just have a passion for working with addictions, mostly substance, but any addiction. So that is why I personally am here in this webinar today. So I appreciate you all being here, and I hope that you're able to learn something new and take something for your personal recovery journey. So I will be leading the first part of the lesson till about 5:30, and Lisa's going to lead the second half of the lesson moving forward. So anything, Lisa, you wanted to say? Because I'm just going to kind of jump right in, start the lesson.
No, yeah, jump right in, start us off. I'll be happy to, join in as you go. And I'm just excited to get started. So
yeah,
let's get the show on the road.
So I will announce our next webinar is May 12th, so 5/12. It will be actually at 4:30. If you guys enjoyed me and wanted seconds, then I will be leading that webinar also, because I'd say if I had to pick a runner-up for skills for addictions, it's radical acceptance. So the topic is radical acceptance, and it will be, again, the 12th of May at 4:30, just slightly earlier time. With myself and Stephanie Morgan. Again, the topic is radical acceptance. So kind of can piggyback a little bit off of, like coming off of the addictions discussion. Like there's a lot of radical acceptance that we can utilize in addictions work. So if you want a round two, especially with me, then come on back and we'll see you then. If you cannot attend, if that's a little too soon, but you're still interested, remember, even if you sign up for the webinar and you can't make it, you still get the link and you get the benefit of learning the skill. So, and it's also, like I said, probably my favorite skill. So always work in progress of radical acceptance. So to start, I thought we could do a little like contributing into the chat. So well, maybe using some opposite action here, but I want everyone's thoughts, since I can't see you, but the only way I can hear from you is if you put something in the chat. It's like kind of talking into space a little bit. So my first question for you all is, how would you define addiction? Like, what thoughts come to mind? you know, it doesn't have to be anything super sophisticated, just like how would you define addiction? So for example, for me, I used to watch Intervention a lot when I was working in with substance abuse clients more in dual diagnosis, and they would always say addictions defined as continuing to use despite negative consequences. There are many definitions of addiction, many addictions, but I just want to see what you guys think. The need to have something.
Yeah, Alaina, I think of it as something that's like consumes you, you know, like you are striving for it, thinking of it, you know, it's in your thoughts, in your actions.
Thinking about it even when you don't use it. You'll see that in the skill that we're going to teach, the skill I'll teach tonight. Great responses, guys. So I'll just recap. Yep. I'm just going to recap the need to have something, a coping mechanism, hard time not doing something even when you don't want to do it, thinking about it even when you don't use it, something that must be done no matter what above all else, the need, an obsession to it, anything, self-harm, this is a good one, nicotine, drugs, sex, etc. Related childhood trauma, addictions can be used to relieve pain solution to their problem, absolutely. Even though I don't want to, I still do, absolutely. I think they are all so relevant, so true. Something you feel you have no control over and have urges for, yeah. As mentioned, and you guys can keep typing in the chat, even though I'm gonna, you know, keep talking, and feel free to type anything in the chat, like any response to something, like, you know, I want to keep this dynamic for everybody. So yeah, feel free to keep contributing in the chat as often as you would like. Any questions, you know, I'll take a notice to pause. But it was said in one of the messages above that there are various types of addictions. So what do you guys think there could be addictions to? Like many exist. What comes to mind when you think of types of addictions that exist? I'm thinking now more, actually, for those of you guys, I know I was a little late to the game on this, but that Netflix documentary about social media and kind of how it hooks us on a scientific level, like I'm really noticing that social media addictions are so true. Chemical addictions, process addictions, drugs, social media, food. Yep. I think it's such a hard addiction because food's everywhere. We have to eat. Drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, food, sugar, caffeine, substances, anything that fills the emptiness. Yeah. Cigarettes, self-harm, oxygen. Another one I think of is work. Yep. Work just came through. Nice job. We're on the same train of thought there. Yeah, keep putting them in the chat, but I actually want to share my screen with you guys. I'm going to show you, this is from the DBT skills manual. Let me see, it's like way down on my windows to share, so hang tight, guys. Okay, this is from the workbook. This is from the DBT skills manual for adults, worksheets and handouts. This is the very back of the book. So not that they're not important in the very back, but this is the back of the book. It's still distress tolerance, and these skills all come from an overview when the crisis is an addiction. So this is kind of a branch of crisis survival skills from distress tolerance, but these are more, you know, rooted in addiction. So, and you see dialectical abstinence, clean mind, clear mind, community reinforcement. I'll be teaching clear mind today. Burning bridges, making new ones, alternate rebellion. Love that skill, adaptive denial. So just some history about this skill set. It's rooted, again, in distress tolerance, crisis survival, back of the book. This is what we're looking at. So if you have the book, this is where you can find it. And look at this list of common addictions. It's probably gonna like maybe pop some light bulbs off for you guys too. Like, oh, wow. Gambling is another very common addiction these days. I've seen folks, you know, infidelity or cheating, variations of. We said sex addiction, shopping, I think absolutely, impulse purchasing, big time, risky behavior, we said self-harm, social networking, speeding, definitely worked on that as a behavior to decrease with people. Exercise, that's when we left off. Exercise and dieting, absolutely addictive. dieting, weightlifting, kind of same thing, running, anything related to sports, spiritual practices, email, food and eating, but breaking it down by food groups, gossiping, internet, right? So many, working here. So yeah, just think about, the addictions that exist for you or the addictions that exist in the environment around you. Because there's so many that really exist, and how we're defining addiction, but ultimately how we use these skills to inform our recovery from those addictions. Any thoughts you guys want to put in the chat? I'll just pause and the chat, or at least anything you wanted to mention.
Yeah, there was a question just that I answered, which book is this from? So it is from the DBT Skills Training Handouts and Worksheet book. It looks like this. That's what Alaina is sharing, if anybody has seen it before. And yeah, I think that we can have all sorts of behaviors that can become addictions for us, right? Like anything that helps me to cope with like maybe a negative mood state that leads to consequences or problems for me could fall into that addictive kind of category. And so there are so many things that can come up. And so when we talk about addiction, of course, substance use, extremely important to talk about that in specificity to addiction. But I think also it's important to broaden the idea, like you're saying, I love that you showed that worksheet, to all sorts of addictions that can impact us and that we can feel kind of out of control related to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I had a thought and it just left my brain. Okay, what I was going to say, yes, this related to what Lisa was saying. Brain fart for a minute. The thing that's unique about DBT is that it really teases out what we call the function of the addictive behavior, right? We're still behavioral therapy after all, like being in DBT is very important. So it asks some questions that maybe other therapies wouldn't necessarily about this behavior, this addiction. What is the function of this behavior, right? Through behavior chain analysis and kind of some exploring, getting in touch with our wise mind, other strategies with your therapist, you would figure out what that is, what that means for you. So I think that is not only important to recognize what the addiction is, kind of come to terms with that, observe and describe that, but understand, come to understanding why this addiction exists. Whenever I was working with substance users, I would say we have to understand why you use. Like why you use is a very important question to ask, and keep asking yourself. Ask yourself ask yourself that question in your recovery process.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going to say, with many addictions, sometimes there's that physiological component, but sometimes it's just, sometimes there are certain addictions that we may have that may not have that physical component. And it's more the behavior, something that the reward that we're getting from it. So I love, looking at that part of it, like what's the function of it? What's it doing for me? And just being really curious about that in a non-judgmental way is a great way to help us kind of like get a grasp and better understanding.
Yeah, before I show you guys a skill, I was just curious to see how addiction was defined across different contexts. So I did some Googling today from some reputable sources, and what we're talking about is actually coming up in the definitions of addiction. Like some of it is just this compulsive behavior versus something that's very physiological. So I'm going to share that also. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Okay, here we go. Defining addiction, right? So this is from Medical News Today. Addiction is an inability to stop using a substance or engaging in a behavior, even though it's causing psychological and physical harm. The term addiction is not only referred to dependence on substances such as heroin or cocaine. Some addictions also involve an ability to stop partaking in activities such as gambling, eating, or working. It's treatable. So that's from Medical News Today. This is from ASAM, the Association of Addiction Medicine. So addiction is a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and individuals' life experiences. In DBT, we have biosocial theory, so it encompasses all of that. People with addiction use substances or engage in behaviors that become compulsive and often continue despite harmful consequences. And this is from good old Webster's. Webster's dictionary. How's a dictionary define addiction? a compulsive chronic physiological or psychological need for habit-forming substance, behavior, or activity having harmful physical, psychological, or social effects, and typically causing well-defined symptoms such as anxiety, irritability, tremors, or nausea upon withdrawal or abstinence, or just the state of being addicted, and also a strong inclination to do, use, or indulge in something repeatedly. So I actually like Webster's the best. I don't know what you guys think, but I think that really captures.
Yeah, I like that one too.
All of it, yeah. So, okay. So I see a comment, and I'm hoping you can touch more on when you know it's an addiction. Absolutely, that's like what I'm going to get into. How do you know it's an addiction, and what are the characteristics and traits of that? So I'm going to be starting off with the skill called clear mind. Okay, clean mind, addict mind. So what we're striving for is clear mind. Okay, and I think that's definitely going to answer that question, because there's actually a list of traits of each state of mind. Okay, so hopefully that helps answer the question. If you guys have other questions along the way, can you touch on this? Can you answer this question? Please let us know. We'll be reading the chat. If I'm teaching, Lisa can just bring it up also, see what's in the chat. So I will once again share my screen. Going to go back to the book. Where is the book now? Here it is. Okay. So again, DBT handouts and worksheets. Scrolling down a little bit. So the skill that I will be teaching is clear mind. Okay. Some of you guys may be familiar with our wise mind skill. It looks just like it with the good old Venn diagram. If you are not familiar with wise mind, you certainly don't need to be to understand this concept, okay? But just to put in perspective, a Venn diagram is usually two opposing ideas, right? And what they have like in common in the middle, kind of like with wise mind, that's, emotion mind and reasonable mind are two opposing mind states. It's not exactly the same here. Keep that in mind. Addict mind and clean mind are both dangerous states of mind to be in. Right. So they're like seemingly different, yet have some similarities, but they're just both dangerous. Okay. Just keep that in mind. We're striving for clear mind. Okay. So if someone's an addict mind, and this came up a lot in the chat too, like that addiction's defined as like everything you think you're doing and saying like is really centered around your addiction. And even though you don't want to do it, you keep doing it anyway. So when someone's an addict mind, right, they're very impulsive. So this kind of identifies with the emotion mind. We're impulsive, we're one-track mind, right? We're willing to do anything for a fix, right? That means who do I have to talk to get money? What do I have to steal to get this? Like, how do I lie to this person to obtain that, right? Like, so that means a compromising of your own personal values to get to either that substance or to continue that addictive behavior, right? So values are out the window. We're doing anything. There's a lot of thinking and planning mode going on like throughout the day. You're just like looking forward to end of the day type activities, looking forward to the weekend type activities. Can't wait to go to the casino. Can't wait to go home. I'm going to go on Borgata.com and gamble, right? Can't wait to see this person engage in, risky sexual behavior, whatever it might mean, right? So when someone's in addict mind, like the addiction rules you. And the urges for habitual problem behaviors determine your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, right? So people who are addicted very strongly identify with that. They're like, it's like this, they describe it to me as like this like inner part of me, like this demon that I feel that is not me. Like it is my addiction and my addictive behavior. But when I'm in addict mind, I'm not considering other people. I'm not considering their feelings. I'm not considering any consequences. I'm just completely consumed with this addictive behavior, how I can get it and how I can get it again and again and again. If anybody can relate to this, just put a little yes, heck yes in the chat, thumbs up, like absolutely, you can relate to that. Give us a little holler. Yes, yep. See lots of yeses, yeses, yeses. 100%, right? So I will share that there's been a lot of growing research on addiction past maybe 10 years or so, especially with an opiate crisis happening, people just, dying way more often from addiction, sadly. So brain studies have been done, MRI studies that show actually over here at Penn, that an addicted person's brain is changed, right? So the part of your brain that controls impulses, right, that's our prefrontal cortex, actually narrows and changes shape so that all you think about, you're consumed by the addiction. And that's why, because your brain literally changes to only allow just that. So you do forget values. It's not a moral crisis, right? That's not what's happening. Addiction changes your brain. The neural connections and pathways are shifted, and it can go back, right? It's not permanent, but you know, there are significant brain changes that occur, and that's why addict mind is going on, right? Why your thoughts, emotions, behaviors all center around an addiction. Okay, so let's look at what addict mind actually looks like. If you go scroll down, what does addict mind look like? This is to go back to answer that previous question, right? Engaging, you know, you're in what we call active addiction, right? For whatever behavior that is, you're actively using, you're actively engaging in that behavior. I don't really have a problem. We call that minimizing, right? Making the problem look smaller. That's a component of addictive behavior, is we have these thinking mistakes that, you know, kind of center around the addiction. So when we minimize it, it's not really that big of a deal. I can do a little, right? Again, that's kind of like some denial, right? I can do it on the weekends. That's especially true. I hear that a lot, specifically with substance use. I'll just drink on the weekend, like I'll just cut back on the week. And then, so that doesn't tend to last very long for people who are truly addicted. Thinking that you can't stand it. I can't stand this emotion. I can't stand this person. I can't stand this situation without using this substance, doing this behavior, fill in the blank. Glamorizing addiction, right? So like all the great things about it, you know, this memory and that memory and this thing I did, right? Just, you know, your affect changes, you light up, you smile, whereas opposed you're, you know, you're depressed or miserable. Looking for ways to do it. It's easier now than ever. Social media is very easy to find things, buying paraphernalia, selling or exchanging items related to addictive behavior or like to obtain it, stealing, prostituting, lying, hiding, isolating, kind of classic addiction signs and traits. Acting busy, gotta go, like avoiding people, right? Like don't really want to be around people so they don't know what you're up to. Committing crimes, acting like a corpse, just like unfeeling, like numb or disconnected to people emotionally, having no life, because again, like you're just consumed, that's all you do. Acting desperate or obsessed, not looking people in the eyes, and it's like dishonesty, having poor hygiene. I know people with active addiction, they look a hot mess. You're not showering, not changing your clothes, coming to the office, the hair is in like a bun on the side, you know, avoiding doctors. Sometimes I would also say seeking out doctors too, especially if it's drugs, prescription drugs, but avoiding doctors to not have to answer questions about physical health, mental health. Maybe you can't afford to go to a doctor right now if it's a gambling addiction. If it's a sexual addiction, you definitely don't want to go to an OBG and have them ask you about your partners or safe sex practice, you know, like, so a lot of those things come into play. I just want to pause. Do you guys have questions as I answer the previous question about like how to tell if someone's in an addictive phase? Any questions you guys want or comments you guys want to put into the chat? Just pause for that. Okay, I see some thumbs up. I don't see too much coming through the chat, so I'll move on because I do want to define clean mind, okay? Because again, clean mind's still dangerous. And clean mind can really trip people up, especially in we call early recovery from your addiction. So this is where people, so addiction really, whatever the addiction is, requires a true overhaul in life, right? I say change people, places, and things. Things can mean habits. Things can be material things, right? We have to really do a complete overhaul and like a reevaluation of our lives. Where do we go in our free time, our weekends? Who do we spend the time with? What are we really doing, right? How much of that relates to our addiction, right? A lot of things need to change beyond just stopping the addictive behavior or the substance, right? So when someone's in clean mind, now a lot of times people can have like a very rosy glow and like a honeymoon period once they stop their use. Like, I'm so happy I stopped my use or my, you know, my addictive behavior. Like why did I ever do that? How could I do that? You know, I'm just so much happier without it. Like there's this honeymoon period. So people feel compelled to like not continue making those changes because it just feels so good. Like you're in like emotion bind, but in such a positive way, right? Or some people are just willful and they're not having like this rosy outlook. They just think willpower alone, there's like this naivety, you know, like being naive about recovery and really what it takes to be successful, right? So either way, I think people can be in clean mind, whether you're like super honeymoon period or naive, getting stuck in clean mind is still dangerous. So when someone's in clean mind, you're still taking risks, right? So if it is substance, for example, like just because this is a really common like example to relate it to, like you're still hanging out with the same group of friends, they're going out drinking and partying, but you're like, I'll just say no, I'm still gonna go to the bar on a Saturday night. You know, like the people around me are still toxic. You know, I didn't try a meeting or any therapy or like, you know, therapy, but no meeting, like not a full package, right? So still doing a lot of things. I still talk to my dealer, you know, I still talk to my ex, you know, I still have codependent people around, you know, so like we're still doing a lot of the same things. And sure, this takes time to phase out, but there's this belief that I can do it even without making all these changes, right? So you're still taking risks, not avoiding or at least minimum setting limits with your people, places, and things. So when you're in clean mind, you are clean, like you're not using the substance or doing the behavior, but you're oblivious to dangers that might cue, meaning like trigger, right? Like set it into motion, habitual problem behaviors, right? You believe you're invincible and immune to future temptation, right? Willpower alone, I got this. You know, I hear I'll never use, I'll never cut again. I'm like, never say never, right? So we just think that's all we have to do is just stop and we're good, right? So that's definitely a fallacy. I've seen people relapse on self-harm this way. I've seen people relapse on substance use this way. So it truly is a dangerous place to be, right? All I need to do is stop, right? So what does that look like? Okay. Clean mind looks like apparently irrelevant behaviors that in the past led back to addictive behavior, right? So something that you don't think is a big deal, but is going to lead you back down that road. With this, I think of people, right? What people are you surrounding yourself with that maybe they're not, I don't know, putting the bottle to your mouth, but they frustrate you to no avail, right? Or they ask you out 10 times, let's go to the bar, let's go to the bar. Then eventually you're going to give in and say yes, especially if you've had a bad day that day, right? Thinking, I've learned my lesson, I'm good, I can control it, right? I don't have an addiction problem anymore, right? I equate addiction down to something like diabetes. Someone's never not a diabetic anymore, right? Just like addiction, we're never not an addict anymore. We have to just continue to maintain it, right? So to say like it's here, it's not like a light switch turning off and on, right? Stopping or cutting back medication that helps with addiction. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But people think, oh, I'm doing well, like I'm just going to cut back on my meds. I've seen that a lot. Being in environments where others engage in addictive behavior. Yep. So those parties, that bar on a Saturday night, seeing friends who are still addicted, not changing your people, living with people who are addicted, things, right? Keeping your paraphernalia around, right? All the shot glasses, but whatever you have, carrying around extra money, right? Money is a huge trigger for people. We've had to talk sometimes to people about what do we do with extra money? How do we keep it safe in an account or something, or give it to someone? Being irresponsible with my money, dressing like an addict. This is an interesting one. I had a client once who said, I have my sober and like school clothes because she was a teen, and she goes, I have my party addict clothes, like on the other side of the closet. So I need to get rid of my party addict clothes. Not going to meetings, this is huge. There are meetings for all types of addictive behavior, gambling, sex anonymous, overeaters anonymous, you name it, there's a meeting for it now. That is a huge warning sign for me is when people stop going to meetings or their thoughts around meetings change, they become more willful, they're not as engaged or taking in the lessons, internalizing them. That to me is a huge sign that we're going back into addict mind, right? Willpower alone is what I think is only what we need, or isolating, you know, thinking I can do this alone, I can stand this. So hopefully that gives you guys a nice overview of this clean mind, because I think people can really see addict mind, but it's not so easy to see clean mind, right? But we're striving for clear mind, right? This is our safe place. right? You're clean, but you remember addict mind, right? So you like enjoy your success. Addict mind isn't this like, you know, stranger in the night. Like we still are like, hey, addict mind can come back at any time. They can open the door like at any point, right? And I need to know that. And I need to be aware of that. You know that relapse is impossible. Like I said, never say never, right? You enjoy your success, but you still have to plan for sobriety and have relapse prevention plans, cope ahead plans in place, because there will be a time where you're tempted and you need to know what skills to use. So that is something to certainly work with a therapist on. If you're going to meetings, doing step work, talking about what that looks like, you know, how do I avoid temptations? How do I approach things in a skillful manner? How do I use supports? Right. So this does require like more individualized work. But it's the ideal scenario. It's the balance of all sides, right? So I will pause because it is 5:30. Before I log off, I want to see if anybody has questions. And Lisa's skills, I think, will help bring this together and figure out how the heck do I get into clear mind. So we're not leaving you hanging.
Yeah.
But any questions before I log out and Lisa takes over? Anything you guys want to say, mention?
Well, I appreciate you introducing that, Alaina. It's great. And I do think we're going to talk a little bit to piggyback off of what you're saying. I want to talk just like briefly about the idea of dialectical abstinence. And then we're going to be getting into a little bit around alternate rebellion and adaptive denial and how to use some of these skills.
I love that, especially alternate rebellion.
So
it's a good one. So thank you guys for being awesome listeners. I'll be locking out and maybe I'll see you next month. All right, come on back. Thank you.
Yeah, for radical acceptance. Thanks so much, Alaina.
Bye.
Bye. So I loved that Alaina was able to introduce that to us and get us into, you know, our states of mind when it comes to addiction. Piggybacking off of that, I want to talk a little bit to you all about the idea of dialectical abstinence. You know, Alaina said something when she was sharing that, like, we want to plan for abstinence and we want to expect that relapse can happen. And that has a lot to do with the premise of dialectical abstinence in DBT. So DBT is dialectical behavior therapy, right? And dialectics are at the core of everything we do in DBT. It's one of the things that makes the therapy different than other types of therapy. Well, one of many things. So dialectics teach us that two seemingly opposing viewpoints or two seemingly opposing truths can exist at one time. Things that we would think couldn't exist together, maybe, or they seem to be in contrast. So I would say, you know, an example of that with the COVID-19 pandemic is that the COVID-19 pandemic caused disconnection and it caused connection. So it caused disconnection because we were socially isolated, you know, there was a lot of distance, we were socially distancing. But it also caused connection because it allowed for things like we're doing now, like a webinar, which is something that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, I wouldn't have done so frequently, telehealth and those kind of communications. So that's the idea of dialectic. So how does that apply to the idea of dialectical abstinence? Well, dialectical abstinence really hones in on the idea that we want to be striving for two seemingly opposing things at once. And those things are complete abstinence. So dialectical abstinence is the idea that we are swearing off our addictive behaviors. We are working towards complete abstinence from, you know, our substance, our addictive behavior, whatever it might be, that's the goal. Simultaneously, it is holding the principle and acknowledging that slips are going to happen, and we are going to make mistakes because no one is perfect. So we are really trying to release the pressure of perfectionism when we use the skill of dialectical abstinence, recognizing that, you know, slip-ups are inevitable, that they're a part of life. So we're striving for complete abstinence on the one hand, and we're planning for it. And on the other hand, we're acknowledging that relapse could happen with our addiction. And when it does, we want to utilize harm reduction. So abstinence is kind of like one model of recovery thinking, give it up, you know, whatever the addictive substance is, behavior, total abstinence, give it up. Harm reduction is the idea that we're going to try to reduce the harm that would come with our use. And so DBT is taking these two seemingly opposing viewpoints in dialectical abstinence, saying, hey, there's room for both of them. They can both exist. And what we want to do is strive for abstinence, recognize that slips can happen. And when they do, we want to get back on track as quickly as possible. So it's holding these two recovery models together. And so that's our synthesis. Our synthesis of the two together is dialectical abstinence. The goal is not to engage in the addictive behavior again, while also knowing that if a slip up happens, we want to minimize harm. So if you were reading your DBT book along with us, which I can share in a moment, but right now I'm just going to kind of talk away. The pro is it works, but the con is it's a lot of work. You don't get a vacation from, recovery and striving towards it. But I love the idea of dialectical abstinence because it's the idea that if you do experience a relapse, it's not the end of the road. Like there's some compassion in that. Like it's not the end of the road. You can get back on track. You can get right back to where you were before, which really helps to stop what I think can sometimes be a really harmful pattern circle in the addiction process, which is that idea that like we're working so hard towards recovery, and then when a slip up happens, there can be so much guilt and so much shame, and we can really get into feelings of self-loathing or pity, which just really perpetuates our desire to soothe through the substance that we're using or any kind of addictive behavior pattern. And we want to break that cycle from occurring. And I think dialectical abstinence is a really nice way to conceptualize and view the recovery process so that we're not getting stuck in that pity situation, that self-loathing, that like really beating ourselves up. It's kind of like, okay, I'm striving for abstinence, and I know that I might make a mistake, and if I do, I'm going to get right back on track. I'm going to do what I can to reduce the harm that came from that relapse, and I'm going to work back towards abstinence again. So it's planning for both and allowing room for both things, and just really letting go of perfectionism and breaking that cycle. And we all know nobody's perfect anyway, so why strive for it? It just doesn't even exist. And so that's going to take me into skills of alternate rebellion and adaptive denial. Any questions about dialectical abstinence before I jump into those skills? Any questions? Anything you're wondering about? That was just a little brief introduction, a little taste of dialectical abstinence for everyone. So let's get into some of my favorite skills here that aren't taught in our standard DBT skills teaching when it comes to alternate rebellion and adaptive denial. And continue to ask questions if you have them, throw them in the chat. I will save like the last 10 minutes for questions in case anyone has general questions that I didn't answer or more specific questions about any of the skills that we went through. So I want to talk about alternate rebellion to start. The skill of alternate rebellion, when we engage in addictive behavior patterns, sometimes we do so, whether it's using substances or other things. Alaina's example was great with like the regular clothes and then the party clothes. Sometimes one of the things that can feel kind of thrilling or appealing or reinforcing, in DBT we would say it's reinforcing, it keeps our behavior going, is that addictive behaviors and addictive behavior patterns can feel a little edgy. They can feel thrilling. They can feel exciting. It can be a rush. And when we give that up, really boring. Like it can feel like something's missing, right? And we talked about at the beginning, it's really important to look at and explore what is the function of my addiction? Like what is this doing for me? And that's so important to know because in order to change something, we have to first know where we're at. And in order to change it effectively, we have to know what it's doing for us. So it's totally non-judgmental here. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just whatever it's doing. We want to be curious about that so we can know how to get those needs met in other ways. So that's what alternate rebellion is all about. Alternate rebellion is all about finding a way to do something that's thrilling or feels a little edgy or is a little bit exciting, but that doesn't have the negative effects associated with addiction and addictive behavior patterns. So alternate rebellion is a way to rebel against authority, convention, boredom of, not breaking rules or laws, by replacing our really destructive behaviors with behaviors that still feel maybe fun, but they keep you on the path to your goals. So some examples that are from Marsha Linehan's book that I was talking about are things like dyeing your hair a wild color, like something that you wouldn't normally do. Maybe you get a tattoo or a body piercing, and that might be something that feels a little bit more edgy. It might be expressing, unpopular views or your opinion. I know we have to be careful in this scenario we're in, but, allowing your voice to be heard might feel a little bit edgy. Maybe dressing up or dressing down when doing so is unexpected. That's actually one of my favorite ways to do alternate rebellion. I just like to sometimes just get dressed up. It doesn't really matter where I'm going. If I feel like getting dressed up, I'm going to get dressed up, and, who cares? Likewise, if I'm really feeling like getting dressed down, I might do that too. So that can be kind of a fun way to do it. One that's in here that you might not think of is it says do random acts of kindness. There is really something kind of thrilling and exciting about doing random acts of kindness, whether it's just giving someone a nice compliment, something that's thoughtful, or buying someone a coffee when you're standing in line with them at the Wawa, wherever it might be. It's really exciting. I don't know if anybody's ever had someone do something like that for them. Feels amazing. Or if you've been on the other side and you've done it, it can feel really good too. I just did something nice for someone. Kind of gives that temporary uplift in feelings in a way that's way safer and doesn't have any negatives like our addiction or substances would have for us. It has on here, shave your head, wear mismatched shoes, mismatched clothes. Write a letter saying exactly what you want to say. Spoiler alert, don't send the letter, just write the letter. You're going to have different consequences if you send the letter. It says, somebody wrote here, it can feel extra rebellious if you are sneaky or anonymously nice to someone. Yeah, it really can feel that way. You just did something good. There's one on here that says have secret thoughts. Something that you're thinking that nobody else knows of, and it's kind of funny or feels kind of exciting just for you. But yeah, it can be really fun to do something anonymously for someone and make someone's day, and they don't know that it happened, but that it happened. So it's kind of thrilling or exciting to hear about it. Has one on here, wear clothes inside out. I do that all the time by accident. Not even kidding. My cardigan, I think, is on the right way, but usually if you see me with my cardigan on inside out, it was probably just an accident, not act of alternate rebellion, although that would be good. So one of the ones that I used to love to do, I used to work in a setting that was a little bit more corporate, and sometimes we would have these really big administrative meetings, and this is kind of a small dip into alternate rebellion. I had color changing nail polish. And I'm going into this meeting, it's very administrative. It's all these heads of the company. So, this is a time I'm going to dress up in, my slacks and look very professional. But I would paint my nails with color changing nail polish. And so it would color change based on your body temperature. And it was kind of a really pale pink color, maybe similar actually to what I have on my nails today, just a really pale pink. But I can't remember if it was you got hot or you got cold, whichever one it is. I can't remember what makes it turn. But it turned bright, super hot pink. Cannot miss these fingernails, hot pink. And I always found it kind of fun because it never failed that I would wear, my alternate rebellion nail polish into one of these very serious meetings, and someone would be distracted, wait a minute, weren't your nails a different color when you came in? Did you just paint your nails? Like, what happened, right? And it was like, it just like kind of felt fun. Be like, no, it's color changing nail polish, you know, yep, that's what just happened. So, you know, it's anything that just helps you to feel a little connected to that thrill and excitement, whatever it is. One of the ones that's on here says, don't bathe for a week. Straight from the manual, don't bathe for a week. You know, again, this is a judgment-free zone when we use these skills. What we want to look at is what's effective for you. So you want to drop the judgment. If not bathing for a week or expressing unpopular views or shaving your head helps you to feel like you're able to do something a little bit edgy and you're filling that need without the substance that's causing any kind of problems in your life, then it's worth it, right? It's all about effectiveness in DBT. So if it's getting you closer to your goals without negative consequences, it's effective for you, and we want to test it out for you. So that's the idea of alternate rebellion, and the list goes on and on. You know, you can think of your own things that you can do that feel kind of rebellious. So go ahead and think of some, jot it down, and, you know, test it out, see what works. The second skill that I wanted to talk about is adaptive denial. Adaptive denial is one of my favorites. So you might be looking at me and thinking, Lisa, you know, I am a therapist or I've done therapy before, and denial is not helpful in therapy or as a human. You have a point, but this is adaptive denial. So DBT is very dialectical, right? You might hear in therapy, like, we don't want to deny things. We don't want to be in a space of denial. However, DBT, as dialectical as it is, would say sometimes denial is not the worst thing. And denial is not the worst thing when you are using adaptive denial. So adaptive denial, when your mind feels like it can't tolerate a craving for addictive behaviors, you want to try adaptive denial. Here's the thing about a craving. Most cravings come and go within 10 minutes, whether they're physiologically based or we're talking about behavioral addictions. Usually a craving lasts about 10 minutes and then it passes. That doesn't mean that it won't come back. It might come right back. You know, it might come, go, and then 10 minutes later you have another craving. That could happen. But adaptive denial is a skill that we want to use when cravings are striking and we want to try to ride through without acting on those cravings for our addictive behaviors. When you're using adaptive denial, you just want to give logic a break. Don't argue with yourself on this one. Like, you just want to throw yourself into it and go for it, and just try it out. One of the things that we talk about a lot in DBT is that emotion follows behavior, like the way we feel follows our behavioral actions. And the skill is, I think, an example of that in a lot of ways. So one of the ways that we do it is when an urge hits, we deny that we want the problem behavior or substance. We convince ourselves through self-talk and through our behavioral actions that we want something other than the problem behavior. So for example, an urge to have a cigarette, it says here in the manual, we might reframe that to have a flavored toothpick. Maybe if we want something sweet, we pop a piece of, you know, flavored chewing gum instead. If you have an urge for alcohol, for example, you could reframe that to say you want something sweet. You know, maybe you want a candy bar instead. Sugar actually helps to increase and hit on our dopamine receptors, so that's kind of a chemically adaptive replacement too. Maybe an urge to gamble, we could replace with alternate rebellion, our alternate rebellion skill that we just learned. So one of the ways to use adaptive denial is to say, I don't want that problem behavior. What I really want is this other thing. And then we're telling ourselves, yep, that's what I want. That's what I want. I really want that other thing. That's exactly what I'm going for. And we're repeating that. And that's why you kind of have to let logic go a little bit on this skill, right? Because you could say to me, but Lisa, logically, I know what I'm really wanting, right? But we're just going with this and we're practicing this because the goal is we want to get through the craving without acting on it. That's the goal. So that's where we're trying to get to. We want to be adamant with ourselves in our denial. We want to engage in the alternate behavior. So if you're convincing yourself you want a toothpick, get that toothpick and put it in your mouth, right? We want to convince ourselves all the way that this is what we're going for. So be adamant about it, follow your behavior through all the way. If you're telling yourself, you know what I really want is just a candy bar, then, you're going to the store, you're getting your favorite candy bar, you're eating it mindfully, you're paying attention to that as an alternative to maybe picking up a substance. Another way that we can do this skill is to put off addictive behavior. So the idea behind this is saying, well, I can do that, but in 10 minutes, like not right now. If I really wanted to, I could, but I'm choosing not to for the next 10 minutes, or I'm choosing not to for the next 5 minutes, whatever is an interval you feel like you can get through. And then what happens is when that 5 minutes comes up, we recommit. We recommit again, and it's very minute by minute, moment by moment, being abstinent. It's the idea of like one day at a time. I'm going to stay sober just for today. That's really what this part of adaptive denial is talking about, but it's taking it down to like the most small, measurable interval that you can connect with. Just this teeny tiny little interval. It might be 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I only have to stand this for 5 minutes. You know what? I don't have to worry about the rest of my life and committing to abstinence forever. I only have to stand this for the next 5 minutes. And so it's like kind of pumping ourselves up for those 5 minutes of commitment. And then at the end of it, the end of the 5 minutes, we recommit again for another 5 or whatever interval feels comfortable for us. And it's doing it over and over and over again. I think there's another way to actually use this skill. I've done it myself. Sometimes it's kind of like pushing something away. I'm not going to think about that for today. I'm not going to think about that for the next 5 minutes. I did this skill. I used this in my own adaptive way, unrelated to addiction this time. And I think it's important to talk about how you can kind of play with skills in different ways to get them to work for you. So one of my kids got some blood work back, and the blood work was like really kind of like devastating blood work. It was like, okay, either this could be indicating, these levels could be indicating there's like a tumor or something seriously wrong, or it could just be a lab error. But we can't repeat this blood work for another 2 weeks. That's like kind of distressing, right? And we know these skills are distress tolerance skills. And so what I said to myself is I basically used adaptive denial, and I denied the problem situation until the 2 weeks were up when we were going to get the blood work repeated. And every day, when the thought would come in my head, like, oh my gosh, what if it's a tumor? I would say to myself, for today, I'm making a commitment that, I'm not going to think about that because, I'll cross that bridge on such and such a day. And it was a lot of over and over and over again, committing to that problem doesn't exist. The problem doesn't exist because I had to function in life, right? I can't be like, just like worried, a nervous wreck every single day, which is probably internally how I felt because that was very distressing. 2 weeks goes by, we get the repeat blood work done, everything was fine, it was a lab error. The skill is so helpful. Like just think about that example in itself. This is non-addiction related. So these skills can be used in all different ways, right? It can be used specific to your addictive behavior patterns. It can be used specific to substances. It can even be used to like, sometimes we worry, like our worrying can feel like an addiction. Like our mind just wants to keep going back to it and back to it and back to it. Like we feel like something good's going to come from it, but not so much. It doesn't usually happen, right? They say it's like, worries like being in a rocking chair, you're moving, but you're not getting anywhere. And I found out, was very lucky that at the end of that, everything was fine. It was a lab error. And I was so thankful that I had my DBT skills and specifically adaptive denial, like denying the problem exists for a little bit to get me through that. And the same thing is true when we use adaptive denial and we're thinking about denying that we want something for a little bit. We're pushing it off. That's not the thing I want. Okay, so I'm realizing I talked over my time. I said I would save 10 minutes for questions. I didn't save 10 minutes, but we do still have some time for questions. So I'm going to cut myself off before I continue talking because I love DBT and I love the skills. I use them in my own life all the time. So I could go on and on forever. So what questions do you all have about how to use this? Let me take a look and see. So somebody said, I mentioned sugar. What would you do to be edgy? How about examples of unhealthy choices? Yeah, so I did talk about, it's actually very common to have sugar cravings when you're abstaining from alcohol, and that has to do with the brain chemistry. Certainly, I don't want to have substitute addictions where we just like pick up an addiction for sugar as an alternative to alcohol, but it's actually very normal to, like maybe crave chocolate or something like that as you're reducing or stopping alcohol use. But, maybe that might be something instead that's like, again, we're talking about, when we talk about addiction, we're talking about something that has negative consequences in your life. So in theory, depending on how many candy bars you're having, it could have a negative addiction. So that might not be the one that you want to choose. It could have negative consequences for you. But if you're having, like a fun-sized candy bar or something like that, what if the person is heavy and addicted to sugar too? Yeah, if you're addicted to sugar too, we want to pick a different coping skill, right? So, and I think that's where it goes back to, like, this is all so specific to the individual. And that's where Alaina was saying, like, we want to work with our therapist to find what's the function of this behavior for me. If we're doing it to feel good or to get a release of, adrenaline, maybe exercise might be something that could be helpful, as long as exercise doesn't become something that leads to damaging relationships. It doesn't become, negative for our body, things like that. Somebody had said earlier, that how do we know what's an addiction? And I do think, like, anything that leads to negative results, either in our relationships, psychologically or physiologically, is something for us that we want to avoid. Let me see here. Yeah, addiction can be a loaded word, sure. Yeah, I think there's a difference between like a behavioral addiction, and we're, using both of them today, like a behavioral addiction that we maybe think about a lot and we feel driven to do, or maybe it's causing a disruption in our relationships, versus like a real physiological addiction where there's a physical dependency. And those are two different things. But the skills that we're talking about today, you can use as they work for you. And as we talk about dialectics, and multiple truths existing, we wanted to make sure that we hit on all the topics. Let me see, any other questions? Someone says eating disorders can be triggered by restricting food. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, especially in people with pre-existing conditions. Yeah, I think, like, anytime we talk about any kind of skills, you want to take what works for you and leave the rest, right? Absolutely. So for you, you want to think about, again, what works, what's effective, what's getting you closer to your goals, and what's getting you further away from your goals. And so it's going to be very individualized. And that's where we have to look at, what is the function of this behavior? What is it doing for me? And, is this helpful or harmful? That's what it comes down to, in a really non-judgmental way. What other questions? Does anybody have questions about the skill of alternate rebellion, adaptive denial? We have like another minute or two left. I love all the comments, such great ideas. And I do think it's really important to pay attention to and listen to. In DBT, we would say your own wise mind. These skills, apply them for you as you see fit, but you really want to connect to your wise mind and what's going to work for you and what isn't going to work for you. And, obviously that's so different for so many different people. Any ideas for what to do for adaptive denial if the behavior is vaping? Does it need to be something else in the mouth, like a toothpick? Oh, I love this. Someone did lollipops and it helped. Yeah, I really think, like, again, you want to go back to the function of the behavior. So this is something you would work with a therapist on to figure out, like, what is this doing for me? Some helpful ways to kind of check in with this really are around mindfulness. Like, I would say, how are you feeling before you vape? You know, how is someone feeling during vaping? How are they feeling after vaping? Being really mindful of ourselves and our behaviors in a non-judgmental way will help us to know what might work and what might not work. Something in the mouth like a toothpick may work. Gum. Someone did lollipops. Thank you, Rebecca, for that suggestion. Great idea. Again, it really is just whatever is effective for you and doesn't lead to other problems. Right? So that's what we want to think about. That's how we know a behavior is effective. There's like no long-term negative consequences if we use it, if it's effective. All right, somebody put a link in there for someone to check out. Quit smoking, vaping. Great, I love it. So that's something Kevin might be able to check out. Other questions for people? You know, some of it's trial and error. And that's why we talked about that idea of, you know, working towards abstinence while knowing that, you know, slip ups can happen. You know, that's such an important part of this. You know, we have to test out what works for us, what we find helpful, what we don't find helpful. Any other questions before we conclude for today? Comments, things that you want to share? I appreciate everybody being here who was here today. I appreciate all the thoughtful comments, questions, things like that in the chat. You know, I just appreciate hearing from everybody. If you're curious about radical acceptance, I would say check it out for sure. It's a great topic, really, really great topic. Can we get a link for this recording from Tracy? Yes, Tracy, and everybody else here, you will get a link. It will actually be emailed out tomorrow for anybody who signed up. You know, you will get that link. You know, feel free to share it, watch it. Again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. I think everybody should have gotten my email when you signed up for this. Absolutely, feel free to, you know, reach out if you have additional questions or anything that I can be helpful with. But I just really appreciate everybody taking the time out to come here and listen to me and Alaina talk about DBT skills for addiction. I appreciate time is our most valuable resource, and I feel honored that you all took a moment to spend it with me. So, you know, from my heart to yours, thank you so much, and I appreciate you being here. Have a great night, everyone. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks, everybody.